My mother set down her fork. My aunt stopped mid-sentence. And my husband looked at his son like I hadn't said a word. That moment, the silence after I spoke, told me everything I needed to know about the next chapter of my life. I need to back up. I was 31 when I married my husband. Not young, not naive, not rushing. I had a stable job as a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction firm in Ottawa. I had my own condo on Carling Avenue that I'd been paying down for 4 years. I had a routine I liked, friends I saw regularly, a savings account I actually contributed to. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me, I was just living. I met my husband at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in the Glebe. He was funny, a little quieter than the rest of the table, and he listened when I talked. Actually listened, not just waited for his turn. He was 44, he had a son from his first marriage. He was upfront about all of it on the first date, which I respected. His son was 23, studying business at Carleton, living with him in his rental in Nepean. We dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. I thought I knew what I was walking into. His son, I'll call him my stepson, was polite enough when we first met. A little distant, but I understood that. His parents had divorced when he was 16. His mother had moved to Vancouver. He and his father were close in the way that men who don't talk about feelings become close. Through proximity, through habits, through an unspoken understanding of each other's silences. I was new. I was an interruption to a dynamic that had settled into itself. I gave it time. What I didn't fully understand then was how my husband had been managing things financially. His son wasn't working. He'd taken a reduced course load due to stress and was in his 4th year of what should have been a 3-year program. My husband was covering his tuition, about $9,000 a year at Carleton, plus his phone, his car insurance, his groceries, and a monthly allowance that I later found out was $800. When we married and combined finances, I found out exactly how much of his income was going toward all of this. I didn't say anything at first. It wasn't my place, I told myself. It wasn't my son. That phrase would come back to haunt me. We moved into my condo after the wedding because it made the most financial sense. My mortgage was lower than any rental we'd find in the city, the location was good, and I owned it outright. My husband's name wasn't on the deed. That had been a mutual decision, practical, not pointed. His son stayed in the Nepean rental for a few months, then the landlord sold the building and he needed somewhere to go. My husband asked if he could stay with us temporarily. I said yes. Of course I said yes. That was 18 months before the dinner. Temporary stretched. 3 months became 6. 6 became a year. My stepson had a bedroom in my condo, my husband's name on the Netflix account, food in the fridge he hadn't bought, and a parking spot in the underground that technically belonged to my unit. He worked about 12 hours a week at a sporting goods store in Kanata and spent the rest of the time gaming, driving his car, and occasionally attending class. I want to be fair. He wasn't cruel, not at first. He was just absent in a way that felt deliberate. He'd walk past me in the kitchen without acknowledging I was there. If I asked him something directly, he'd answer with the minimum. If I said good morning, sometimes he'd nod. Sometimes he wouldn't. My husband noticed, but framed it as, he's just introverted. He's like that with everyone. But I'd seen him laugh on the phone. I'd seen him chatty with his friends when they came over. He wasn't introverted. He just didn't see me. I made a list once, not out of pettiness, but because I needed to see it written down. All the small things. The time I cooked dinner for 3, and he took the last of something without saying thank you and didn't ask if I'd eaten yet. The time I had an early morning work call and he had friends over until 2 a.m., and when I asked them to keep it down, my husband said to me afterward, he doesn't have a lot of social opportunities. I don't want to make him feel unwelcome. The time I rearranged the coat closet to make more room and came home to find my things moved back and his things spread across the whole rack again. None of it was explosive. All of it accumulated. I was patient. I kept telling myself this was a season. He'd graduate, he'd get a job, he'd move out, things would settle. My husband loved me. I loved him. We were good together when it was just the two of us. but it was rarely just the two of us. The dinner was in November. I'd invited my mother, my aunt, and my older sister to the condo for my mother's 63rd birthday. I'd been planning it for weeks. I'd made her favorite, roast chicken with root vegetables, the same recipe my grandmother used to make on Sundays in Thunder Bay, with the herbs tucked under the skin and the potatoes finished in the drippings. I'd bought a birthday cake from the Portuguese bakery on Gladstone. I'd set the table properly, the cloth napkins, the good wine glasses. My husband was there. My stepson was there, which I thought was fine. The more the merrier. My mother is warm and easy. She'd have been happy to include him. He sat at the end of the table and was on his phone for the first 20 minutes. That was fine. I said nothing. My mother asked me how things were going at work. I started to tell her about a project we were managing up near Gatineau, a mixed residential build. A lot of moving pieces, something I'd been quietly proud of. My stepson looked up from his phone. No offense, he said, but construction is kind of a chaotic industry to be proud of. My mother blinked. My aunt put down her glass. I thought I'd misheard him. Sorry? Like the environmental impact alone. I'm just saying, it's not exactly something to brag about. He said it casually. The way you say something you've thought about saying for a long time and finally decided wasn't worth holding back anymore. My husband said nothing. I looked at him. He was looking at his plate. I said quietly, "That's my job you're talking about. In my home. In front of my family." My stepson shrugged. "I'm not attacking you. I'm just making a point." "You're being disrespectful," I said. That was when my husband looked up. And what he said, the words he chose, were, "Let's not make this into something. He's allowed to have an opinion." I heard my sister inhale. The table went quiet in that particular way that happens when everyone present understands that something has just shifted and no one knows where it's going to land. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be clear about that. I didn't cry. I didn't storm off. I looked at my husband and I said very evenly, "Not at my mother's birthday dinner. Not like that." He said, "You're being too sensitive." My mother touched my hand under the table. We got through the rest of the evening somehow. Cake was cut. My aunt made conversation about her garden. My sister helped me clear the dishes and said nothing in the kitchen except, "I'm sorry," and held my arm for a moment. After my family left, I cleaned up alone. My husband had gone to watch something in the bedroom. My stepson had gone back to his room. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the street below and thought, I have been quiet for too long. Not just that night. I mean the 18 months, the coat closet, the 2 a.m. friends, the unanswered good mornings, the dinners he didn't thank me for. My husband's consistent choice, when there was a choice to be made, to smooth things over with his son at my expense. Not dramatically, not with cruelty, but consistently, every single time. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay next to my husband and thought through things very carefully. I've always been that way. I don't react well in the moment, but give me a few hours and I know exactly what I think. By 6 a.m, I had clarity. My stepson's car insurance was going through a family plan that my husband and I shared. I was paying 2/3 of the household expenses because my husband's income was lower. The car insurance for my stepson's vehicle was coming out of the joint account. I removed it that morning, not maliciously, just stopped the automatic payment. The Carlton tuition was being e-transferred from my husband's account, but my husband's account had been running a deficit for 3 of the last 6 months, and I had been quietly covering the difference without it ever being named or acknowledged. I stopped covering the difference. The monthly allowance, the $800, was something my husband set from his own account, technically, but every time his account ran short, I'd been the one absorbing the household costs so he could send it. That stopped too. I didn't announce any of this. I didn't send a message. I just made adjustments quietly, the same way I'd been quietly absorbing everything for 1.5 years. My husband noticed within a week. His account flagged. His son called him about the insurance. There was a conversation I wasn't part of, and then my husband came to find me in the living room one evening with that look on his face, the one where he was deciding how to frame something as my problem. He said, "My son's insurance lapsed." I said, "Yes, I know." He said, "Did you do something to the payment?" I said, "I removed it from the joint account. I've been covering expenses I was never asked to cover. I think it's time for that to stop." He stared at me. "That's his insurance. He needs it." "He has a father," I said, "and a job." "You know, I don't have the room right now." "Then he'll need to find another way to cover it," I said. "That's not something I'm responsible for." My husband was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're punishing him because of one comment at dinner." I looked at him. I thought carefully about what I wanted to say. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm stopping something I should have stopped a long time ago. I've been paying for your son's life in my home while he treats me like I'm invisible. And when he insulted me in front of my family, you told me I was being too sensitive. So no, I'm not punishing him. I'm just done funding a dynamic that has cost me for a long time." My husband didn't have an answer for that. He tried over the following weeks to have the conversation a few different ways. He was hurt. He felt I was being cold. He said he'd talk to his son. He did talk to his son. I don't know what was said, but my stepson knocked on the door frame of the kitchen one afternoon while I was making coffee and said, stiffly, that he was sorry for what he said at dinner. It was the most words he'd strung together to me in months. I said, "Thank you. I appreciate that." I meant it. It wasn't nothing. But an apology doesn't reconstruct something that's been coming apart for a year and a half. My husband and I started seeing a couples counselor, a woman with an office near Westboro, warm and direct, the kind of therapist who doesn't let you talk around things. She was helpful. She named some of what had been happening in language that made my husband actually hear it. "You've been asking your wife to absorb the cost of your relationship with your son," she told him, "financially and emotionally. And when the cost became visible, your first instinct was to tell her she was wrong to feel it." He was quiet for a long time after that, the kind of quiet that means something is settling. My stepson got a second job. He's now working close to full-time hours across 2 part-time positions. He reapplied for student aid he'd previously been eligible for but hadn't bothered to apply for while my husband was covering everything. His insurance is in his own name now. The allowance stopped. He's still in the spare room, but we've had a conversation, all 3 of us, at the kitchen table, about what a realistic timeline for him moving out looks like. We settled on 8 months. That conversation was uncomfortable and necessary, and I'm glad it happened. My husband and I are still together. I'm not going to tell you it's been easy. Some trust, once it shows a crack, takes a long time to feel solid again. We're doing the work. Some weeks it feels like progress. Some weeks I still feel the weight of that November dinner. My mother's hand on mine, my sister's "I'm sorry" in the kitchen. And I have to remind myself that the reason I stayed wasn't weakness. It was because underneath all of it, when I look at my husband clearly, I see someone who was doing something wrong without fully understanding what he was doing. That's different from someone who knew and didn't care. I still think about what he said, "You're being too sensitive." I think about all the times I'd accepted some version of that and moved on. I think about the list I made, the coat closet, the dinner, the 2 a.m. nights, and how each item seemed small enough to swallow alone and how I swallowed all of them. There's a lesson in that I'm still learning. Not the dramatic version, not stand up for yourself or know your worth, the kind of thing that fits on a graphic. The quieter version, the one that sounds more like, pay attention to patterns, not incidents. Any single evening can be a bad night. It's what repeats that tells you the truth. My mother called me a few weeks after the dinner. She didn't mention what had happened at the table. She asked about work, about the Got No project, about whether I'd been sleeping okay. At the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, she said, "You've always known how to handle things, you know. Even when you were small, you'd go quiet and then you'd figure it out. I always trusted that about you." I held on to that for a long time after we hung up. I'm still figuring it out, but I'm doing it with my eyes open now, and that makes all the difference. There's something I kept coming back to in the weeks after that dinner. Not the comment itself, though I still hear it sometimes. That casual, almost bored tone, but what happened in the silence after. My husband looked at his plate. That's what I couldn't shake. Not anger, Not embarrassment on my behalf, just stillness. Like he'd already decided, somewhere before that moment, that keeping the peace with his son was worth more than standing beside me. I don't think he knew he'd made that decision. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. The harm in our situation wasn't coming from malice. It was coming from habit. He'd spent years absorbing his son's moods, softening every edge, making the path smooth. It was what he knew how to do. And when I came into their life, he just kept doing it. Except now I was sometimes the thing that needed to be smoothed over. What I've learned is that the consequences we experience in life aren't always punishment for dramatic failures. Sometimes they're the quiet result of small choices made repeatedly over a long time. My husband's slow erosion of my standing in my own home wasn't one bad night. It was 18 months of small surrenders, each one reasonable sounding on its own. And the consequence? Losing my trust, watching me pull back financially, sitting across from a couples therapist who named it plainly, that consequence was just the accumulated weight of all those little choices finally becoming visible. My stepson's situation taught me something different. He'd grown up having things managed for him, his discomfort smoothed away, his expenses covered, his accountability deferred. And so, he became someone who didn't understand the connection between how you treat people and what you receive in return. When I stopped covering his costs, it wasn't cruelty. It was the first time in a long time that the natural result of his behavior was allowed to reach him. He got a second job. He applied for aid he'd ignored. He apologized stiffly, yes, but genuinely. Something in him understood, when the cushion was removed, that the world requires something from you. I think about the kind of person I want to be through all of this. Not just whether I made the right call financially, I think I did, but whether I handled it with any real integrity. I didn't yell. I didn't humiliate anyone back. I made quiet adjustments and said what I meant when asked. That matters to me. Doing the right thing badly is still doing it badly. I wanted to be clear-eyed, not vindictive. There's a difference, and I had to keep checking myself to make sure I was on the right side of it. What my mother said on the phone stayed with me. You've always known how to figure it out? I used to think that was just something mothers say. Now I think she was pointing at something real. Not a talent, but a practice. The practice of going quiet, thinking it through, and then acting from a place that you can actually stand behind. That's not easy. It requires something from you. It requires you to sit with discomfort instead of reacting to it, to hold yourself to a standard even when no one's watching. I'm not through this yet. My husband and I are still working. My stepson has 8 months left under my roof. There are hard conversations still ahead. But I'm having them with my eyes open, my values intact, and my name on the deed. And that's enough to keep going.